5. Libraries. Explore. At the conclusion of this lesson, you will be able to use appropriate vocabulary to describe libraries, explain the process of preparing a function to be added to a library, and to clearly write the documentation for functions in a library. Let's get started. All right, as a warm-up, how would you share a function with another person so they could use it in their own program? Think about that and jot down your ideas. How about this? You could email code to each other. You could use a shared document. You could copy or paste functions from one tab to another. You could also send it on paper, fax it, and somebody else could retype it in. Lots of different ways to share code. Well, here, have you ever wanted to share some of your code with a friend so they could use it to add a cool feature to their own program? Maybe, maybe not. But maybe you've seen some cool features that you would like to add to your program. And it'd be great if you could borrow the code. After all, it's already been written. And why reinvent the wheel? Okay? Well, maybe you've also got a collection of functions in one program that you want to use in another of your own programs. How can we easily share functions between programs without copy pasting? Well, let's take a look at this folder here. This folder represents a library, which is a collection of functions that can be used in many different programs. Here, I've opened up the folder, and you can see that the envelopes inside have been grouped together in this folder, and they represent a library of cake baker items. You've got cake cost, average cake, make cake. Okay, each one of these libraries, or each one of these functions or envelopes within the library cake baker has a function inside of it, and on the front it's got the name of the function and its parameters. A library should have documentation for the included functions. The documentation should state how each function works, a complete list of the parameters, and what, if anything, will be returned. So look at make cake, for example, right up here. Make cake, it creates a cake. Now, in a real program, you would maybe state a little bit more of how or what, but creates a cake. Tiers is the number of layers. Flavor is the flavor of the cake. Those are things that are passed. Notice down here, tiers and flavor. Cake cost. It calculates the cost of making a cake. You have to pass it the layers of the cake and the flavor of the cake, and it returns the cost of making the cake. Notice too that it tells you the parameter name, tiers, what type of data that is, it's a number, and then a description. Average cake calculates the most common cake. It passes a cake list, which is a list of strings, and it returns a string that is the most common cake. You need this information so somebody knows what something does and what information they need to send it and what they can expect back. Now, this detailed type of documentation is also known as an application program interface, or an API. APIs are specifications for how the functions in a library behave and can be used. Now, what potential problems could come up if I tried to use a function without knowing what it does or how to interact with it? This would be similar to looking at the front of a function envelope and having to guess what the function does and what type of data or the parameters, what data type parameters are needed, and what is returned, if anything. Average cake, cake list. I don't know. Is that the average cost of a cake? Is it the average flavor, the average size? I don't know. You need more information. Okay, and if it returns something, what am I expecting it to return? Is it a number? Is it a string? Is it a list? Okay. What if there's an error when you run the code which calls this function? What happens to return if you don't store it in a variable or print it to the console? There are things that you need to understand a little bit more about, not the details of how to write it, but the details of how to interact with it. Now, if you take a look at this and discuss okay, with somebody if we're in class, or if you've got a friend that you can discuss it with before looking at the answers. But my friend wants to use my find smallest function in her program. Is this function ready to be shared in a library, and why or why not? So pause for a moment and take a look, figure out. What do you think? Well, I can tell you that it's not quite ready for libraryhood. You got to watch out for global variables. If a function accesses or updates a variable elsewhere in your program, that function should not be added as is. All right? Now, notice function find smallest is past num1 and num2. If num1 is less than num2, smallest is set to num1. Smallest is a global variable. Remember, originally we were using just global variables, and that was great. Now that's a little bit of a problem if we want our function to be a library, because somebody else might not call it smallest. They might just call it small or little value. Okay? With a partner, rewrite the function so it can be shared in a library. Pause the video. Hint, did you use return? If you used return, instead of saying smallest is set to num, write return num1, else return num2. Now you're returning the smallest value, and somebody in their main program that calls this function could call the smallest value whatever it is they want to call it. All right, and let me pause this. Sorry about that. What I want to do is write this as a function. Okay. Oops, there's a pen. Okay. So right here, instead of having this, I would put return num1, else return num2. And then in the main program, okay, whether you called it smallest or smaller, you could have, somebody could write this, instead of this, they would put something like small. They could put var small is set to find smallest and pass the numbers. Okay? Should not use global variables. Now, before adding a function to a library, things that we want to check. 1, check for the use of global variable within the function. Okay? If it's got a global variable, don't use it. Check if another function is called in this function. If so, both functions should be in the library. So just like the global variable, anything referenced by the function should be accessible to whoever's using it. And then write the documentation for the function. Make sure you've told somebody what the function does, what the function needs, and what the function gives back. Now, here's the same function. Function find smallest. If num1, notice return num1, else return num2. It may look a little different from yours, but it should be about the same. And it should work as expected. Now the function is almost ready to be shared in a library, but it needs its API. So try writing the API for this. Remember, you need to say how the function works, all the parameters, their data types, and a short description of each, and what, if anything, will be returned. So pause the video and try doing that. All right, so find smallest, given 2 numbers, finds the smallest. Remember, it's not a whole list, it's just the 2 numbers. Num1 is the first number, num2 is the second number, and it returns the smaller of the 2. All right. Now, a library needs a name. Different libraries provide different functions. In this class, we're going to follow these rules. There will be no spaces in the name of the library, and the first letter of the library will be capitalized. Variables do not capitalize your first letter. It's not that you can't use it that way, but if we stick to these rules, then you can tell when something is a library and when something is just a variable. This library can now be shared with others. They can use the functions within for their own programs as long as they follow the rules set forth in the documentation. We've seen libraries in action before. Here's the name of the library, math, the name of the function, round, and then the parameters, 5 and 10. The math library is built into AppLab. A lot of places have libraries built in, functions that are used all the time in a particular setting. You've seen libraries in actions before? Notice the name on the name of the library is first. Then there's a dot, which is followed with the name of the function. And finally, the parameters. It's the formatting that you will use to call libraries, functions and libraries. Library name, dot, function name, and then parameters. Now, pause for a moment and think about if these are libraries, calculator, display list, and filter database, what functions might you put into these? And it doesn't have to be an exhaustive list, but think about what different kinds of functions would you put in? Okay, you're back. Do you have some ideas? Well, if you're building a calculator library, you might have add, subtract, multiply, divide, mod, any of those, right? How about display lists? You could have display list and you would do it one at a time, dot numbered, dot bullet, and you would pass it a display list. You could also have something that would display it in order, in alphabetical order or numerical order, things like that. Filter database. Okay, you could have words that begin with A or B or C, less than a value. Okay, list all the items, filter the database on a particular value, on a particular date, things that contain a particular phrase. Now, libraries in AppLab. This is a video that we watch in class. Here, you would watch it. It'll be in the Canvas course, and it's also available in code.org. So you want to watch this so you understand about libraries in AppLab. If you're watching this as a video at home, go ahead and finish watching this video and then check out libraries in AppLab. Here you've got two new vocabularies. Library. This is not the library that you go to find your books or to meet your friends. This is a group of functions or procedures or methods that may be used in creating new programs. API is Application Program Interface and is the specifications for how functions in a library behave and can be used. Two new vocabulary words. Now, next up, you're going to investigate libraries. Are you ready? Go for it.